As the last line of sunlight thinned across the horizon, ancient people felt a quiet shift ripple through their world. The soft gold that warmed their fields and courtyards slid into a muted red, then into a fading violet, and finally into a deepening blue that signaled a truth they understood far more clearly than we do today. Once the sun disappeared, the rules of existence changed. No matter the continent or culture, that moment carried a weight that settled over rooftops, pathways, and open land like an unspoken warning. It was the hour when tasks ended abruptly, when even the most confident travelers quickened their steps, aware that dusk was not simply a passage of time but the arrival of a different reality. Shadows stretched early, growing long before true darkness arrived, bending across stone, grass, and packed earth as if claiming territory. Families watched these shifting forms with instinctive caution, tightening their circles, gathering children, securing animals, and, with practiced hands, closing gates and shutters. A single torch crackling to life in a courtyard was not a symbol of comfort but a declaration of necessity. Its glow pushed back only a thin veil of darkness, reminding everyone how vast the night truly was. In those final breaths of light, a subtle tension drifted through villages and cities alike. Quiet conversations faded, footsteps softened. People seemed to listen more closely, as though the world beyond the hearth were inhaling. Daylight had offered clarity, night dissolved certainty. What waited outside that fragile radius of flame was unknowable, a mixture of prowling creatures, wandering strangers, and imagined forces shaped by generations of cautionary tales. The moment darkness arrived was never just an ending. It was a threshold. Ancient people felt the air cool against their skin, sensed the earth change temperament, and understood that the land they had walked confidently, only minutes earlier, now demanded humility. With the sun gone, sight surrendered, and every sound, distant hooves, rustling leaves, shifting wind felt amplified, pulling awareness outward into spaces that could no longer be seen. Yet even in this unease, there was an unspoken rhythm to the transition. They had learned how to meet the night with preparation rather than panic. And as the last traces of colour drained from the sky, their thoughts turned to the fragile flames, simple tools, and careful rituals that would carry them through the long hours ahead. Fire, to ancient people, was never just a tool. It behaved like something alive, a trembling ally that could warm their fingers one moment and threaten to vanish the next. When the sun dipped below the horizon and the world dissolved into shadow, they would lean close to the first spark they managed to coax from stone or ember, watching it bloom with the same hope one might feel toward a fragile messenger carrying their fate. A single flame, barely steady on its wick, offered the illusion of safety, while reminding them how thin that safety truly was. Its glow revealed only a small circle around them, leaving the rest of the night untouched, silent, and waiting. Torches hissed when wind pressed against them, their smoky trails dancing unpredictably in the dark. Clay lamps, filled with precious oil, burned with uneven strength, casting long, wavering shadows across walls that already felt too close. The fire's scent clung to everything. Clothes, hair, woven mats, as if marking each person with the proof that they were trying, in their own small way, to hold back the vastness beyond their reach. Yet even with all their effort, flames behaved according to their own temperaments. A weak draught, a misplaced hand, a drop of spilled oil could undo hours of preparation, plunging a family into sudden obscurity. Because of this, tending fire became an intimate ritual. Hands moved with careful memorized rhythms, adding fuel, adjusting the angle of the wick, nudging embers to ensure they did not sleep too deeply. People gathered close not only because warmth felt comforting, but because the flame's presence reassured them that the night had not yet claimed the interior of their home. Its soft flicker steadied breathing and softened the edges of fear, even though everyone understood that the flame's loyalty could falter without warning. The contrast between the fire's delicate strength and the darkness pressing against it shaped their evenings. In the glow, stories emerged, whispered with low voices. In its absence, silence grew heavy. Each night reminded them that fire was not a convenience, but a guardian they had to earn repeatedly. And as they tended this quiet protector, the rituals surrounding its care began to blend into something deeper, customs and beliefs that would soon guide every gesture taken after dusk. When night settled fully across ancient landscapes, it brought more than darkness. It carried whispers, unseen threads of fear that touched every home, every quiet breath, every cautious glance toward the edge of the fire's glow. People sensed that the world changed when light faded. Shapes that looked harmless during the day stretched into unfamiliar forms. Sounds that went unnoticed under the sun suddenly felt personal, as if the night itself were leaning closer. And in this fragile space between certainty and imagination, the oldest superstitions began to grow. Without walls to block the wind, and without the hum of machines to drown out the wild, the night spoke in a language modern ears rarely hear. Owls cried out with voices that seemed too human. Foxes screamed with startling sharpness. Trees shifted their weight, creating slow groans that drifted through open-air homes. Families listened to these sounds with a mixture of dread and fascination, trying to guess what moved beyond their small circle of flame. When they could not explain the noises, their minds filled the silence with unseen presences, spirits wandering between homes, creatures slipping through the dark, forces that watched from just beyond the lamplight. These beliefs were not foolish to them. They were tools for understanding a world that offered no scientific comfort. When something rustled too close to the doorway, people imagined a restless ancestor. When a sudden gust extinguished a flame, they believed a spirit had brushed past. These interpretations softened fear by giving it shape, turning the unknown into something familiar enough to negotiate with. Families hung charms made from bone, clay, or woven fibers near their doors. They placed sleeping children closest to the center, believing protection pooled where light gathered strongest. Even the arrangement of mats, or the choice to keep a small ember alive through the night, came from stories passed between generations, stories meant to shield minds as much as bodies. In this blend of fear and creativity, ancient nights formed their own quiet culture. What lived in darkness might not have been real, yet the behaviors it inspired certainly were. These customs guided choices, guarded households, and shaped the rhythm of life after dusk. And as these imagined beings settled into the collective memory, they influenced more than belief. They shaped how people prepared to survive the long hours until dawn. When the sun finally slipped away, and the last traces of color drained from the sky, entire civilizations seemed to exhale at once. The busy noise of daytime life faded into a quieter, watchful rhythm that stretched across continents. Villages that felt lively beneath the sun became clusters of wavering torchlight, each flame guarded like a fragile lifeline. Fields that had echoed with tools and voices turned still, their outlines barely visible beneath a growing curtain of blue. Forests surrounding early settlements deepened into mysterious realms no one dared to approach without purpose. Across the ancient world, darkness carried authority, shaping choices long before dawn returned. Travel halted almost entirely once night took hold. Roads that had guided merchants and farmers during the day became silent pathways watched only by the moon. In Mesopotamia, traders who journeyed freely under sunlight gathered within city walls before darkness swallowed the open plains. In China, rural families retreated into courtyards as gates closed with deliberate weight. Across Mesoamerica, footpaths vanished into dense shadow, and even seasoned travelers waited for morning rather than risk creatures that moved unseen. Europe's winding routes, lined with forests and marshland, demanded patience until sunrise. Night created borders where none existed in daylight, reminding people how fragile movement truly was. Cities lived by the same rule. Places that roared with markets, animals, and disputes during the day shrank into islands of flickering illumination. The edges of these cities dissolved into darkness, leaving only a few guarded streets active. Soldiers patrolled cautiously, their steps slower, their eyes searching the shifting dark for shapes that daylight never revealed. Most households stayed indoors, aware that the protection of walls was far more meaningful after sunset. The contrast was striking. A world vibrant and confident just hours before now folded into itself, moving with quiet precision, as if trying not to disturb whatever waited beyond the final lamp. Across continents, people accepted this shift without question, as though humanity had an ancient agreement with the night. Its presence shaped behavior as strongly as weather or geography, creating a hidden half of life that modern eyes rarely notice. When darkness ruled, people respected its boundaries, moving carefully within the narrow spaces they trusted. And in that restrained stillness, a different rhythm emerged, one that whispered of older instincts. It is within this nocturnal world that the habits of the home began to form now. As darkness settled over the land, The ancient home shifted in mood so gently that an outsider might not notice, yet every member of the household felt it like a change in the wind. Daylight loosened its grip on the walls, and the familiar rooms that echoed with noise began folding inward, becoming smaller, quieter, more alert. Families stepped inside with practiced motions, closing the evening behind them as though shutting a gate against an unseen tide. What was open became guarded, what was casual became deliberate. The home was no longer a place of work and chatter, but a refuge shaped by instinct and memory. Doorways were secured with wooden bars that thudded into place, sending a low vibration through the structure. Animals were guided into sheltered corners, their shifting bodies adding warmth and a faint scent of hay to the air. Tools were gathered quickly, lifted from thresholds, and stored in piles that would not be touched again until dawn. Every action carried a quiet urgency, as though the night pressed forward, waiting for any sign of carelessness. In the dim interior, a single flame became the center of gravity, its small tremble guiding where people moved and how close they stayed. The air changed as fires were coaxed to life. Smoke unfurled slowly, rising into the rafters and settling into walls that had absorbed centuries of the same nightly ritual. Woven mats rustled as they were drawn closer to the hearth, creating soft layers of sound that blended with the crackle of burning embers. The texture of the home deepened, shadows thickened in corners, and familiar objects became outlines, then impressions. Families prepared their sleeping spaces earlier than tiredness demanded, knowing the danger that came with stumbling in darkness. A misplaced step could bring injury, and a cry in the night could invite risks no one wanted to face. Yet this tightening of space brought a strange comfort. Within those walls, each person knew their role. The father checked doors, the mother arranged bedding, children huddled near warmth, and elders murmured old advice shaped by harsher nights. The home protected them, but it confined them too, reminding everyone how thin the boundary was between safety and the vast world outside. Inside this cocoon of dim light and careful movement, the objects surrounding them gained meaning. Everything now had a purpose, a place, a silent duty. And as the family settled, the night's second world, the one defined not by fear alone, but by the tools and rhythms that helped them endure, began to reveal itself. Though the walls held firm, the family knew that the home's strength depended on their vigilance. Every whisper, every shift in the wind, every flicker of the flame reminded them that they lived within a balance that could tilt without warning. Still, in that vulnerability, they discovered a sense of unity that daylight rarely required. And it was within this fragile harmony that the deeper rituals of night would soon unfold again. Inside an ancient home, the structure itself shifted once night settled, revealing choices shaped less by beauty and more by survival. Walls built from mud, stone, or timber thickened the air, holding warmth while keeping the outside world at a distance. Narrow openings served as windows, not for views, but for necessity, allowing a sliver of light in the day and almost none at night. When darkness arrived, these small features turned the home into a contained world, where every movement demanded care. The kitchen, often positioned near the door for daytime airflow, became the heart of the night. Its flame offered the only reliable glow, drawing people toward its warmth and anchoring the family within a single, shared space. Shadows stretched from that flame like long fingers, reshaping familiar rooms into shifting boundaries. Smoke stained the walls in uneven patterns, creating dark streaks that marked years of tending fires in the same corner. Livestock resting nearby shifted their weight softly, their movements adding a living rhythm to the architecture of the night. Children whispered close to the walls, their voices carried upward by the stillness that seemed to settle in layers. Families prepared their spaces long before sleep, clearing paths that daylight had made harmless but darkness rendered uncertain. Water jars were moved to familiar corners, tools tucked away where wandering hands would not meet sharp edges. Even the floor demanded attention, smooth in some places and unpredictable in others, reminding everyone that a single misstep could turn the night against them. These choices were not accidents. They were responses to a world where darkness shaped behavior as firmly as any rule or custom. Architecture and routine blended together, each guiding the other in a quiet exchange that repeated every evening. The home did not simply shelter. It coached its occupants on how to move, where to gather, and how to remain safe until morning returned. Within these walls, light and shadow held equal authority, shaping a nightly world that felt both protective and fragile. And as families settled into this carefully arranged environment, the design of the home revealed how every object, surface, and doorway carried purpose once the sun disappeared. What remained was not silence but a different kind of motion, a slower rhythm shaped by the architecture itself, a rhythm that guided every step deeper into the night's hidden world. In these dim interiors, space flowed according to the reach of the flame, transforming the simplest doorway into a threshold between comfort and caution. Nights taught people to read their homes by sound and memory rather than sight, following creaks, breaths, and the soft brush of fabric to navigate familiar paths. Every element of design, from the slope of the roof to the placement of mats, contributed to a silent map understood without thought. This internal landscape shaped how families gathered, how they whispered, and how they rested, drawing them into a shared awareness of the night's quiet power. Here, darkness shaped routine with unwavering, ancient intent. As the last tasks of the evening faded into quiet, every member of the ancient household moved into roles shaped by habit, caution, and a kind of shared intuition that darkness always demanded more care than daylight. The elder, often the one with the longest memory of difficult nights, drifted toward the hearth to study the embers. Their hands moved slowly, turning pieces of wood, gauging heat by the soft glow pressing through ash. They knew the fire could never be allowed to weaken too soon. Too little warmth meant restless sleep. Too much meant danger. Keeping the embers balanced felt like holding the night itself in place. Nearby, the mother sealed food vessels with practiced precision, smoothing lids made from clay or fiber, ensuring no scent drifted into the air that might tempt animals or invite insects. Her movements were quiet but firm, shaped by years of watching how the smallest oversight could shift a peaceful night into one of sudden scrambling. The father, meanwhile, checked the animals in their sheltered corner. Each was tied, fed, and settled. A loose latch or missing rope could lead to chaos before morning, and he had learned that creatures behaved differently once stars filled the sky. Children sensed the seriousness beneath these routines, though they often framed it in gentler ways. They leaned close to adults, their bodies relaxing in the familiar heat of the fire, whispering questions, recounting moments from the day, or humming simple melodies taught to them by older relatives. These small sounds softened the edges of the home, forming a buffer against the shifting unknown outside. Despite the tension that hovered around the night, tenderness threaded through the home. A hand resting on a child's shoulder, a quiet laugh shared after a long day, or a story told in a low voice created pockets of comfort. These moments were not simply affection, they were protection. Stories reminded children of the values that kept the family safe. Songs steadied breathing. Gentle touches anchored wandering thoughts. In a world without artificial light, darkness pushed people closer, drawing warmth and reassurance from one another in ways the day rarely required. Rituals colored the transition towards sleep. A bowl placed near the door, a charm hung above the hearth, a whispered phrase meant to ward away trouble all served as subtle reassurances. They helped the mind settle, telling each person that the home was ready, that they had done everything they could to prepare for whatever might drift near in the hours ahead. And once the last task was finished, a hush fell lighter than fear, heavier than calm, a signal that it was time to surrender to the rhythm of night. Yet beneath this calm lay one final challenge: how to rest in a world where the darkness outside remained unpredictable. And it was toward this fragile act of sleep that the family slowly turned. As the final tasks of evening faded, the family turned toward rest, with a seriousness shaped by countless nights before them. Mats were unrolled across the floor, each placed in a pattern that reflected protection rather than preference. Furs were shaken gently, releasing the faint scent of stored warmth and the memory of earlier seasons. Children settled first, guided to the innermost spaces where adult bodies formed a living barrier between innocence and the unsettled dark. The elderly lay close beside them, positioned where help could reach quickly if breath faltered or joints stiffened in the cold hours. Adults stretched out around the edges, listening to the shifting night even as their bodies surrendered to exhaustion. Animals slept nearby, their steady breathing blending into the room like an ancient reassurance that life still moved in the darkness. One by one the flames were lowered, each light dimmed slowly until only a soft glow remained to hold the night at distance. The home grew quieter as the glow thinned, leaving shapes to merge with shadow and forcing every sense to adjust. Sleep arrived in fragments, never in a long, unbroken stretch, because the night demanded awareness even from those who rested. Someone always woke to check the embers, nudging them back to life before cold crept too far into the walls. A distant howl or shifting branch could pull another from half-sleep, stirring questions about what moved beyond the threshold. Even dreams felt heavier, carrying symbols that people believed came from spirits, ancestors, or warnings woven into the silent hours. Nightmares clung to the mind because the boundary between dream and world blurred when darkness hid everything that daylight explained. And yet, despite these fears, families trusted the shelter they created, knowing that rest was necessary, even when safety felt uncertain. Sleep became an act of surrender, a quiet agreement with the night that they would remain still if the world outside did the same. In this fragile stillness, the rhythms of the home folded into the ancient patterns shared by countless families before them. And as their breathing softened, the darkness pressed against the walls, waiting, as it always had, just beyond reach. Yet within that waiting presence, there was also a kind of strange comfort, as if the night recognized their vulnerability. The family relied on the idea that darkness followed patterns, even if those patterns were imperfect and known only through experience. Some nights passed quietly, offering long stretches where nothing stirred besides the soft breathing of those gathered together on the floor. Other nights seemed restless from the beginning, filled with subtle cracks, distant calls, and the uneasy sense that the world was shifting. In those hours, even the most confident adults felt a quiet tension, knowing that danger could approach without warning or sound. Still, people learned to rest in fragments, trusting that someone else would stir, listen, and rise if anything challenged the fragile peace. And so each night unfolded in balance beneath the sky. As soon as a person stepped beyond the faint glow of the hearth, the world changed in ways the day never revealed. The land around ancient settlements carried a tension that tightened after sunset, as if every tree, ridge, and path became aware of the human presence crossing it. People walked lightly, knowing the boundary between safety and wilderness was only a few paces thick. Beyond that fragile edge, the night had its own inhabitants, creatures that moved with senses far sharper than any human could claim. Their domain began where the village's last ember faded into open darkness. Wolves were among the most familiar figures in this nocturnal world, though familiarity did not lessen the fear they inspired. They travelled in near silence, each step carefully placed, their bodies moving as though guided by a shared instinct. From the shadowed tree lines, they watched settlements with patient interest, alert to the scent of livestock or scraps tossed aside after supper. When one wolf paused, others paused. When one advanced, the pack followed, coordinated by whispers of movement too light for human ears to catch. To families inside their homes, even a distant howl hinted at eyes already searching. Big cats moved differently. Their presence was rarely heard until they chose to reveal it. They circled the outer paths of settlements with an eerie calm, drawn by the faint glow of household fires and the scent of animals penned for safety. A single brush of fur against a branch could signal their passing, though most encounters left no sound at all. Ancient people believed such creatures studied them, learning the patterns of their nights. Whether or not that was true, the idea alone shaped behavior. Doors were barred earlier, children kept close, and vigilance became a nightly ritual too. Hyenas, scavengers with sharp senses and bolder temperaments, ventured closest of all. Their laughter-like calls echoed across plains and refuse pits, unsettling families who knew these creatures followed opportunity rather than fear. Hyenas understood the habits of people, where scraps were tossed, where animals slept, where walls were weakest. They approached from angles that avoided firelight, noses guiding them to anything edible. Their shadows moved unpredictably, sometimes vanishing, sometimes reappearing on the far edges of the settlement as though testing the boundaries of human courage. To the ancient mind, these visits were reminders that darkness had its own rules always. Each of these creatures lived by instincts honed over countless generations, while humans relied on thin walls, shared caution, and limited light. After sunset, the balance shifted. The same land that felt familiar by day belonged to sharper teeth and swifter legs at night. People walked carefully, choosing every step with the hope of remaining unnoticed. Even the act of breathing felt deliberate when the wilderness pressed so near. And as families listened to distant growls or sudden breaks in the underbrush, they understood that the night was not empty. It watched, listened, and waited beyond the fragile glow of home. When darkness settled fully across ancient towns, a new kind of movement began, quiet, deliberate, and shaped by intentions that were often hidden beneath layers of necessity or greed. While families gathered behind barred doors, some individuals stepped into the night with footsteps softened by experience. These were the figures ancient stories warned about, people who used the absence of light not as a shield from danger, but as an opportunity to slip between the edges of society. In early Mesopotamian towns, narrow alleys twisted like dark veins through tightly packed homes, allowing a person to vanish with only a turn. The faint glow of oil lamps hanging in doorways did little to push back the shadows, leaving long stretches of unlit passages where strangers could wait without being noticed. Elsewhere, in Greek villages built on slopes and cliffs, steps carved from stone created pockets of shadow that stretched like hidden chambers. A single figure could linger there, listening for voices, deciding whether a home was asleep. On African plains, or within small clusters of Asian settlements, wanderers followed dirt paths that dissolved into open night, where the slightest breeze erased tracks and carried away the sound of movement. In these places, a stranger could approach silently, slipping between homes that had no windows facing outward, only courtyards turned inward for safety. Night thieves were not always hardened criminals. Some were desperate people who needed food for their children, tools to trade, or animals to replace ones they'd lost. Others were fugitives seeking escape from debts or obligations, hoping the night would carry them beyond the reach of those they owed. But motives mattered little to the families who feared the quiet tap of a footstep outside their door. In the dark, intention could not be read from a face or a gesture. Every unknown figure became a question without an answer. Unlike animal predators, whose patterns could be predicted, people carried unpredictability. A harmless wanderer could become dangerous under hunger or opportunity. A lone traveller might be seeking shelter or searching for something to take. This uncertainty seeped deeply into the way communities built their lives. Homes faced inward to limit access. Storage pits were buried. Tools were hidden beneath sleeping mats. Even the way people spoke about strangers carried caution, shaped by generations of nights when footsteps passed too close. Voices in the dark carried strangely. A whisper could sound like a warning. A faint breath could seem like someone approaching. And because ancient homes had thin walls, families listened to every sound with a mixture of fear and curiosity, imagining the intentions of the night's unseen visitors. For many, the human threat felt more troubling than any creature outside the settlement, because it came from minds capable of planning, adapting, and choosing. And as communities sensed these nightly intruders, they understood the need for defenses not built from strength alone, but from vigilance, cooperation, and the knowledge that the night demanded careful guardianship. When night settled over ancient settlements, the first line of defense was rarely a wall or a weapon, it was awareness. People understood that the world changed the moment the last light bled from the sky, and so they built what protection they could from whatever materials lay around them. Thorny branches were gathered and woven into crude barriers around livestock, their sharp edges meant to deter both animals and humans. Stones were arranged in uneven boundary lines, not strong enough to stop an intruder, but solid enough to make them stumble and reveal their approach. Wooden gates creaked into place and were fastened with ropes that frayed easily, but symbolized an attempt at order in a landscape ruled by uncertainty. Watch posts rose at the edges of towns, often little more than raised platforms of wood or packed earth. The people assigned to these posts were chosen for their endurance or, in some cases, for their expendability. Standing above the settlement, they scanned a darkness that swallowed detail. Their eyes strained, searching for movement their minds could barely interpret. A faint rustle carried by the wind might be a threat or nothing at all. They relied on instinct as much as vision, feeling danger in subtle shifts of air or in the way animals quieted all at once. Fatigue was their constant companion. Hours without light stretched longer than daylight hours, and the mind played tricks when the world offered no clear shapes to anchor thought. A watcher who blinked too slowly might miss the figure crossing a field. Another might mistake the sway of grasses for a creeping predator. Even fortified cities, surrounded by high walls and guarded gates, found themselves vulnerable. A single overlooked crack, a shadowed corner, or a loose stone could become an entrance for those who knew how to move unseen. Rural families, with no such defenses, depended on something far more fragile: trust. Neighbours listened for each other's alarms, for the sharp cry that signalled danger. A clatter of pottery, a sudden shout, or the frantic bark of a dog travelled quickly through sleeping clusters of homes. Some communities used drums, horns, or rattles to warn others, each sound carrying its own meaning. But even warnings had limits. By the time danger was heard, it was often already at the door. These defences, though earnest, revealed a truth ancient people understood deeply. The night could not be conquered. It could only be negotiated with. No barrier was strong enough to fully resist what moved within darkness, and no system was perfect enough to erase uncertainty. People created layers of protection, hoping to discourage threats rather than eliminate them. This constant negotiation shaped their mindset as much as their architecture. They lived with an unspoken awareness that every night required surrender as well as vigilance. And as the world around them shifted into unpredictable patterns of sound and shadow, they learned that the greatest danger was not always what approached, but what they could not see approaching at all. The night itself was their final adversary. When night settled across the ancient world, it did more than dim the land. It transformed the environment into something unpredictable, something that felt aware of every step a person dared to take. A simple errand outside, fetching water, checking animals, or retrieving a tool, became a quiet negotiation with forces that were far larger than any human threat. Darkness magnified the land's natural dangers, turning familiar paths into shifting puzzles. Even the ground beneath one's feet seemed to change character once the sun disappeared. Rainfall, gentle and refreshing during the day, became unnerving at night. Heavy drops erased footprints, blurred boundaries, and washed away the impressions people depended on to guide their way. A trail that had been clear hours earlier could vanish beneath a sheet of mud, leaving travelers guessing which direction led home and which led toward uncertainty. Winds carried their own danger. A single gust could snuff out a torch, plunging someone into a blindness so complete it felt as though the world itself had been erased. Without flame, there was no reference point, only blackness and the unsettling awareness of vulnerable isolation. Fog added another layer of danger. Thick clouds of moisture rose from valleys and rivers, swallowing entire sections of land. A person could take 3 steps and lose sight of their own hand. Even the most experienced wanderers felt disoriented, unable to trust the direction of sound or the slope of the ground. Cliffs that looked distant in daylight became invisible edges waiting for a misplaced foot. Marshes, disguised as solid terrain, pulled at ankles and swallowed weaker steps. The night carried temperature swings that tested endurance. In deserts, warmth fled the earth almost instantly, leaving the air cold enough to stiffen joints and numb limbs. In mountain regions, frost formed silently, coating stones with a sheen that betrayed even careful walkers. Families sleeping under simple roofs felt the cold seep through walls, forcing them to huddle closer, sharing breath and warmth to survive until morning. Insects added to the discomfort, drawn to the faint glow of lamps, swarming with a persistence that made rest difficult. Rivers, too, changed character. A calm crossing could become deadly if nighttime rains upstream caused sudden rises. Water swallowed stepping stones and flooded pathways without warning. A traveller setting out with confidence at dusk might find the river transformed into a barrier before the moon reached its peak. Ancient people never assumed the night was empty. They sensed the environment shifting around them, altering shape and intention. The darkness didn't merely hide threats, it created new ones. The land's familiar logic dissolved, replaced by conditions no human could fully predict. This unpredictability tied together every danger they faced, reminding them that predators, thieves, and storms belonged to the same realm once the sun disappeared. And as the night revealed its volatile nature, people learned that survival required more than strength. It required tools, rituals, and inventions capable of negotiating with a world that moved differently in the dark. Long before a switch could summon brightness, light was something coaxed into being with patience, skill, and no small amount of luck. In ancient workshops, the process began quietly, with hands shaping clay into shallow bowls meant to cradle a flame. These bowls dried beneath the sun, or baked in simple kilns, their surfaces rough and imperfect. A lamp was never just an object. It was a promise that the night could be held back, if only for a little while. Reeds were gathered and twisted into torches, their fibers soaked in resin or fat, each one a small experiment that might burn cleanly or fail without warning. Nothing about illumination was guaranteed. In the corners of these workshops, precious stores of oil waited in sealed jars. Olive oil in the Mediterranean, sesame oil farther east, animal fat in colder regions, every drop represented labor. A single evening could devour resources that took days to collect. Wicks, cut from linen or plant fibers, were dipped and dried, tested and trimmed, because the wrong material would burn too quickly or give off choking smoke that filled a home with irritation. A lamp that sputtered could plunge an entire family into darkness at the worst moment. A torch that dripped hot sap could scorch a hand or ignite thatched roofs. Civilizations adapted their methods to the landscapes around them. Greeks favored steady burning olive oil, crafting lamps adorned with simple patterns meant to guide heat. Egyptians soaked linen in thick animal fat, creating flames that glowed like slow, molten gold. In East Asia, craftsmen folded paper around thin frames of bamboo, forming lanterns that breathed with every movement of air. Nomadic people carried portable fires, small metal cups filled with resin or tallow, designed to be lit quickly and extinguished just as fast. Each invention revealed a different way of negotiating with the dark, an acknowledgement that light was always a temporary companion. Yet no matter the culture, the result was modest. A single lamp offered only a faint halo, barely enough to illuminate a room. A torch gave bright light for a moment, then faded into a smoky glow that wavered with every step. Shadows clung to corners, stretching across floors like silent watchers. Even the best efforts produced only a fragile pocket of visibility in a world ruled by night. Every flame felt like a small triumph, a reminder that humans were pushing against forces far older and stronger than themselves. People cherished these thin beams of light, gathering near them as if warmth and clarity might expand through sheer will. The flare of a wick carried reassurance, while its flicker hinted at how easily safety could vanish. And so the making of light became a nightly ritual, a careful process repeated endlessly, shaping not only survival, but the rhythms of evening life. When the first flame steadied, the home exhaled. When it faltered, hearts quickened. With these delicate tools in place, the night could be faced, never conquered, but gently negotiated with. And from that fragile glow came the rituals that helped families prepare their minds for the long hours ahead. As night deepened and the flame in the hearth steadied into a soft glow, ancient households turned toward practices that reached far beyond the physical world. Light could push back only a small circle of darkness. Everything beyond that circle demanded something different. Gestures, words, and symbols meant to reassure the mind that unseen forces could be reasoned with. These rituals were woven into the quiet moments of dusk, carried out with hands that moved not out of habit, but out of inherited memory. A whispered phrase, a careful placement of an object, or a pinch of herbs dropped into the flame served as an agreement between people and the night. In a Babylonian home, a family gathered around the hearth, tracing small protective signs over the fire. They believed the flame could listen, that it understood the language of intention. The movements were delicate, practiced through generations, each stroke meant to strengthen the fragile boundary between their home and whatever wandered outside. Across the desert, an Egyptian mother tied a simple string around her child's wrist. Though small and easily overlooked, the knot carried the weight of tradition, guarding against beings believed to roam restlessly after sunset. The child might not understand its purpose, but they felt safer with it, and that sense of safety mattered. Far to the north, a Celt hung carved wooden figures beside the threshold. Each figure represented a different kind of watcher, one to guard the doorway, one to soothe dreams, one to keep illness from slipping through cracks in the wall. The carvings swayed slightly in the breeze, their shadows dancing against the wood like tiny guardians standing vigil. And in a quiet farmhouse in Han-era, China, a man fed fragrant herbs to the embers. The smoke curled upward, purifying the air, carrying promises to ancestors that the family respected the traditions left to them. These actions were not dismissed as superstition. They were survival strategies built from countless nights when fear pressed close and explanations were scarce. Ritual offered structure when the world felt unpredictable. It transformed uncertainty into something that could be interacted with, kneaded into a shape the mind could manage. By performing these gestures, families believed they were strengthening an invisible shield, one supported not by walls or weapons, but by continuity, repetition, and belief. The night grew quieter after rituals were completed, not because danger faded, but because people felt prepared to face it. The mind settled, breathing softened, a small sense of order returned. These rituals did not eliminate fear. They guided it, softened it, and layered it with meaning. Even the youngest children sensed when the final gesture was finished, when the home had become ready for sleep. And as these quiet practices echoed across cultures and continents, they shaped more than private moments. They set the tone for how communities behaved after sunset, creating roles, expectations, and shared responsibilities that extended far beyond a single household. The night belonged not just to those who performed the rituals, but also to those who stayed awake to uphold them. When most of the settlement slipped into sleep, a few remained awake, moving through the darkness with a mixture of caution and obligation. These were the guardians of the night, the figures who accepted or were assigned the responsibility of staying alert while others rested. Their steps traced the boundary between security and danger, between the quiet of the home and the vast uncertainty beyond it. A village watcher paced slowly along the perimeter, torch in hand, its flame bending with every shift of wind. Each pass along the same worn path felt different from the last, as though the night rearranged itself between glances. Shadows lengthened and retreated in ways that made the watcher's eyes work harder than his feet. A rustle in the grass could be an animal, a stranger, or nothing at all, yet he had to assume it mattered. Closer to the heart of the settlement, a temple firekeeper tended embers that carried far more significance than warmth alone. The fire was a symbol, a link between the living and forces that needed acknowledgement. Letting it die meant inviting disorder, or so people believed. The firekeeper's role required discipline, patience, and a willingness to sit alone with only the crackle of flames for company. Their thoughts wandered between fear and duty as they fed the embers with small, steady offerings of fuel. The rising smoke curled upward, carrying with it the weight of ritual and the hope that unseen dangers would remain outside the temple's reach. Elsewhere, night workers continued tasks that daylight made unbearable. In hot climates, fields were tended after sunset, when air finally cooled enough for labor without collapsing. These workers bent over crops by the dim glow of lamps, each breath forming a quiet rhythm with the rustling leaves. In workshops, artisans hammered or wove, creating goods needed by dawn. For some, this work was a necessity. For others, bonded servants or criminals assigned to nighttime labor, it was punishment wrapped in darkness. The night turned their efforts into something hidden, seen only by a few and remembered by even fewer. Though their roles differed, all who stayed awake shared a strange kind of isolation. They inhabited hours most people preferred to avoid, witnessing moments the rest of the community never experienced. A watcher might see a wolf slip through the tall grass. A firekeeper might notice the air shift seconds before a coming storm. A night worker might hear distant movement that no one would believe in daylight. These experiences shaped them, creating a quiet hierarchy built not on wealth but on knowledge of what the night revealed. Communities relied on these individuals more than they admitted. Their wakefulness stitched together the fragile peace that allowed families to sleep, and as the night stretched on, their roles formed the backbone of society's unspoken agreement with the dark. Someone must always remain aware, ready to act if the world outside chose to challenge the calm. And from this delicate balance grew the need for something more tools and innovations capable of easing the weight these guardians carried alone. Across the ancient world, darkness did more than intimidate, it motivated. Every culture, facing the same nightly obstacles, searched for ways to reclaim even the smallest corner of the night. What emerged was a quiet wave of ingenuity, born from necessity, crafted by hands that understood how fragile a flame could be. In workshops lit by trembling lamps, early engineers studied the behavior of fire with the patience of astronomers watching stars. They shaped deeper bowls for their lamps, so fuel would burn longer, carved narrower channels to guide wicks, and mixed oils with careful precision to create steadier light. Each improvement felt like a step forward, a moment where darkness lost a fraction of its power. Some civilizations experimented with reflective surfaces, thin metal discs polished until they caught the smallest glimmer of a flame and pushed it outward. The effect was modest, yet to people accustomed to near-black interiors, gaining a few extra feet of visibility felt transformative. Travelers carried portable light sources crafted from bronze, clay, or iron, designed to shield a flame from wind while offering a narrow beam of guidance. These small devices allowed merchants, herders, and messengers to move cautiously through night paths that once seemed unnavigable. Communities expanded their efforts further. As lighting techniques improved, certain regions introduced night markets, where goods could be traded after sunset without relying solely on moonlight. Lamps hung from beams, torches stood in elevated holders, and the air filled with sounds of barter and movement. These gatherings were small, fragile islands of light surrounded by vast darkness, yet they reshaped how people imagined evening hours. In other areas, protective enclosures were built for livestock fenced spaces, reinforced with thorny branches or stone walls, designed to shield animals from nocturnal predators. With better lighting and stronger barriers, herders slept with slightly less fear. Growing cities took another step, organizing early forms of night watches. Groups of individuals armed with torches patrolled streets and gates, calling out to one another from the shadows. Their presence signaled an important shift. People were no longer entirely reactive to the night. They were beginning to coordinate against it. Every invention, no matter how humble, altered the balance between humans and darkness. A longer-lasting wick meant a family could finish one more task before sleep. A sturdier lantern meant a journey could extend a little farther. A reflective shield meant a ritual could continue safely without plunging the home into shadow. These improvements did not erase fear, but they softened it, creating pockets of control where none had existed before. Innovation gave people a sense of participation in the shaping of their nights. They still respected the dark, still recognized its power, but now they stepped into it with tools that carried intention. And it was in those faint circles of light, expanding slowly from home to marketplace, from torch to patrol, that the human experience of night began to shift. With these fragile victories in hand, the world after sunset revealed new layers, sounds, scents, and sensations that shaped how ancient people understood the darkness surrounding them. When night settled across the ancient world, it did not bring silence. It awakened an entirely different orchestra. Without the hum of engines or the insulating walls that soften modern sound, every corner of the landscape vibrated with life. People lay beneath roofs of reed, clay, or timber, listening to a chorus that shifted with the wind and the movement of unseen creatures. Their ears became their most reliable guides, stretching into the darkness in ways their eyes never could. To them, sound was not background, it was information. In rural fields, crickets began their patterned rhythm, chirping in waves that rolled across the grass. Each rise and fall marked the passing of time in ways a clock never could. Owls called from hidden branches, their low hoots carrying a weight that signaled both mystery and warning. Dogs barked sporadically, alerting families to movements too distant or subtle for human senses. A single bark could ripple through a settlement, prompting whispered guesses about what wandered near the boundaries. Forests produced their own soundscape, dense and layered. Leaves rustled as small animals darted between roots. Larger creatures stepped slowly, breaking twigs in ways that made listeners stiffen with attention. Wind threaded through the canopy, weaving soft sighs that could easily be mistaken for whispered voices. In these moments, imagination entwined with instinct. A rustle might be harmless, or a clue of something far more dangerous. Even early cities were far from quiet. Narrow stone streets amplified the echo of footsteps, magnifying each step until it became impossible to tell how close a stranger truly was. Wooden shutters creaked. Pottery clinked faintly as it cooled. The occasional shout or laughter drifted from distant courtyards, carried unpredictably by shifting air. In markets where goods hung overnight, the fabric fluttered, ropes groaned, and the wood of stalls settled with low, creaking tones. Deserts added another dimension. As temperatures dropped, cooling sands shifted, creating delicate friction sounds that rolled like whispers. Distant dunes changed shape with the wind, forming faint hums that vibrated across the ground. Travelers lying under the stars listened for the soft thud of hooves from wandering animals, or the hiss of sand disturbed by nocturnal hunters. Coastal regions layered the night with steady waves breaking against rock or shore. The tide set a rhythm that blended with the chirping of insects and the occasional call of seabirds. Communities living near the water interpreted the slightest change in wave patterns. A faster rhythm hinted at rising winds, while a softer one signaled calm. Every sound mattered. A sudden quiet often meant a predator was near. A rapid burst of noise might signal conflict between animals or the movement of strangers. Families learned to read these signs just as clearly as written script. Sound was their compass, their alarm system, their comfort, and sometimes their dread. Night did not hide life, it revealed it through vibration and echo. And in listening, ancient people navigated a world where hearing determined survival, guiding them through the unseen world that stretched just beyond the reach of firelight. Now, as this soundscape settles in the mind, the night reveals another layer sense that drifted through darkness, carrying meanings just as powerful. When the ancient world slipped into darkness, the air changed in ways modern people rarely notice. Night carried its own language, spoken not through sight or sound, but through scent. Families lying close to the fire breathed in layers of aroma that shaped their sense of safety, alertness, and belonging. The smell of a smouldering hearth was the anchor of it all, a warm, smoky presence that settled into hair, clothing, and walls. It drifted through every corner of the home, a steady reminder that the flame still lived. This scent meant protection. It meant warmth. It meant the night had not yet claimed the household. Beneath the smoke lingered the earthy fragrance of packed dirt floors. Centuries of footsteps had pressed the ground into firm, smooth surfaces, and the smell rose subtly with every shift of weight. It blended with the faint musk of animals resting nearby, goats, sheep, cattle, or dogs, each adding its own quiet signature to the darkness. These scents formed a familiar constellation, one that wrapped around families like a blanket. They knew it intimately. They could recognize it in their sleep. But not every scent brought comfort. Some carried warnings sharper than words. A sudden tang of disturbed soil might signal a creature burrowing too close to the home. The sour trace of a predator's breath, drifting from beyond the walls, could send shivers through those still awake. Ancient people learned to identify these odors with surprising accuracy, because refinement of smell was not a talent, it was survival. A faint whiff of damp fur meant wolves had passed recently. A musky heaviness hinted that a large cat prowled nearby. Even livestock reacted, lifting their heads, sniffing the air, confirming what humans sensed only moments before. Weather spoke through scent as well. Rain announced itself before clouds appeared overhead, carried on a cool breeze that tasted of wet stone and softened earth. Families prepared quickly when they caught that early signal, collecting tools, covering goods, gathering closer to the hearth. In coastal settlements, salty wind hinted at shifting tides, while in desert regions, the approach of cold night air brought a metallic dryness that tightened the skin and signaled the coming drop in temperature. Human presence carried its own signature. Sweat, smoke, herbs, and hunger blended into a scent that lingered behind travelers passing near a settlement at night. For those inside their homes, that smell raised questions. Who was out there? Why were they moving in the dark? The familiarity of one's own household made the unfamiliar sharper, more troubling. Night magnified every difference. In this sensory landscape, scent became a quiet guide. It warned, comforted, reassured, and unsettled. Ancient people breathed their environment in a way modern humans rarely do, reading meaning in each shift of air. Smell filled the darkness with invisible messages, signals carried on breezes, drifting through open thresholds, telling families more about the outside world than their eyes ever could. And as these scents curled around them, the night pressed closer, touching skin, shaping breath, and revealing the next layer of sensation waiting beyond the reach of embers. When darkness settled across the ancient world, it was not only seen or heard, it was felt. The air shifted first, slipping over skin with a coolness that carried the promise of long hours ahead. Homes that had been warm during the day released their stored heat slowly, like creatures exhaling their final breath before sleep. Clay walls, sun-soaked only hours earlier, cooled until they felt almost damp to the touch. Families noticed the change instantly. They wrapped their arms closer around themselves, aware that the night would press against them whether they welcomed it or not. Mats unrolled on the floor carried the chill of evening. Fibers woven from reeds or grasses softened during the day, but turned cool and slightly moist after dusk. Children curled their toes beneath the covers, trying to avoid the first shock of that cold texture. Adults felt the roughness of packed earth beneath their feet, a sensation far more pronounced at night. Every ridge, every grain, became clearer when vision faded and touch stepped forward to guide them. Those who walked barefoot moved slowly, reading the floor like a map, searching for familiar grooves that pointed them safely around sleeping bodies. Darkness also sharpened the sensitivity of skin. A passing breeze slipping through the cracks of a wall felt more personal, brushing against cheeks and arms with a surprising urgency. People could tell where the wind came from simply by feeling which side of their body tingled first. A stronger gust might bend hanging fabrics inward, causing them to whisper against someone's shoulder or face. These soft touches startled even those accustomed to them, because at night, every texture carried the possibility of danger. A brush of cloth felt similar to the skitter of an insect. A shift in air resembled a creature moving too close. Outside the home, the night created an entirely different world of sensation. Dew collected on stones and leaves, making surfaces slick under cautious footsteps. Cold air pooled in low places, rising suddenly when someone crossed through. Travelers felt temperature change like stepping through an unseen curtain. In colder regions, breath emerged in pale clouds that drifted upward, disappearing into the dark as if swallowed by it. That visible reminder of warmth reminded people how vulnerable their bodies truly were. Even inside, the temperature dictated behavior. Families huddled close, sharing heat through closeness. The warmth of another person's shoulder or arm offered as much reassurance as any flame. Skin-to-skin contact was not merely affection, it was survival. Without thick fabric or sealed rooms, warmth was earned collectively. Night had texture too. It wrapped around the body with weight and density, settling on skin until people could almost feel its presence pressing against them. The darkness was not empty, it was tangible, moving, shifting, responding to every breath. And as these physical sensations layered together, cool walls, chilled floors, drifting breezes, the electric alertness of skin, ancient people formed a deep, instinctual understanding of the night. It touched them as much as they touched it, shaping their emotions and sharpening their awareness. Now, with sound, scent, and touch fully woven into the night, the mind begins interpreting their meaning, leading into the deeper psychology of darkness. When vision faded into nothing, the ancient mind stepped forward to fill the space. Darkness did not simply cover the world. It reshaped the way people thought, felt, and interpreted every subtle shift around them. With the loss of sight, the other senses rose to take its place, weaving a new kind of awareness that lived between instinct and imagination. Sounds that seemed insignificant during the day grew sharper, layered with meaning. A distant howl suggested movement. A snapped twig hinted at possibility. A whisper of wind through an opening signaled change. Ancient people listened, not just with their ears, but with the quiet tension running through their bodies. Smell carried its own messages: earth disturbed, animals approaching, rain preparing to fall. Each scent pushed the mind toward interpretation. The darkness asked questions, and the senses responded, stitching together incomplete information into something that felt like truth. This act of assembling fragments became instinctive, a nightly habit shaped over generations. Survival depended not on what people could see, but on how well they could read what remained unseen. In this deep sensory state, thoughts moved differently. They slowed, stretching into the vast spaces that darkness opened. Memories blended with expectation, giving shape to imagined dangers. Stories passed down through families' colored interpretation. A rustle might echo an ancestor's warning, while a sudden chill recalled tales of wandering spirits. Darkness sharpened creativity in ways daylight rarely allowed. Minds drew connections between sound and meaning, scent and presence, touch and possibility. Fear did not always come from danger. It often emerged from the mind's own quiet attempts to understand what surrounded it. Yet night was not only a realm of fear. It also softened emotions, creating moments of intimacy that daylight scattered. Families lying close felt the comfort of shared breath, shared warmth, shared silence. The sky above, unobstructed by artificial glow, revealed stars in numbers modern eyes rarely witness. Under that vast canopy, people felt both small and connected, held by the same darkness that frightened them. The land hushed, offering brief moments when the night felt almost protective. Emotions stretched across a wider spectrum in this darkness. Loneliness deepened, but so did companionship. Fear heightened, but so did awe. The mind existed in a delicate balance, sensing danger while simultaneously absorbing beauty. Ancient people lived in this duality every night, learning to trust their instincts even as they questioned them. The absence of sight did not leave them blind, it opened pathways to a different kind of perception. In this intricate blend of instinct, imagination, emotion, and belief, the night became a teacher. It shaped stories, rituals, warnings, and wisdom. It influenced how people understood themselves and their place in the world. Darkness was not simply endured, it was interpreted, explored, and woven into the inner landscape of human consciousness. And as this psychological tapestry formed, the body itself responded, entering patterns of sleep and wakefulness far different from our own. Long before electric lights stretched the day into an unbroken flow, human sleep followed a rhythm shaped entirely by the rise and fall of the sun. People drifted into slumber soon after darkness settled, sinking into what they called the first sleep. This early rest came naturally. Bodies slowed, breathing deepened, and the weariness of daylight work gave way to a heavy quiet. Homes lay in near stillness, yet no one expected the night to pass in a single, uninterrupted stretch. Ancient families understood that sleep arrived in segments, and the first part was only the beginning. Hours later, without urgency or confusion, people woke. This was the interval between sleeps, a calm, liminal time when dreams loosened their grip, and the world felt strangely suspended. The fire glowed faintly in the hearth, its embers shifting with soft, sighing pops. Someone rose to feed it, shielding their hands from sparks as they coaxed a brighter glow. Another person checked on animals, listening for unusual sounds. A child stirred and whispered a question. An elder murmured a quiet blessing into the dark. This waking period belonged to reflection, small tasks, and quiet presence. Some stepped outside, letting the cool air settle around them. Stars looked sharper at this hour, hanging low enough to feel close. People spoke in low voices, if they spoke at all, as though not to disturb the night's delicate balance. Thoughts wandered more freely during this interval, moving through memory, hope, and worry with a softness daytime rarely allowed. It was a natural companionship with darkness, one that ancient bodies accepted without resistance. The second sleep came later, gently and without command. People returned to their mats or bedding, curling into warmth that had faded since dusk. This final stretch of rest carried them toward dawn, though it was often lighter, more dream-filled, and more easily broken by movement outside. The night, after all, demanded attention. No household slept entirely at once. Someone always listened. Segmented sleep created a system of rotating responsibility. A father might rise during the first interval to check tools or livestock. A mother might wake during the second to soothe a child startled by a dream. Grandparents often used these hours to whisper protective prayers, believing that the boundary between seen and unseen thinned when the world lay between sleeps. In this shared rhythm, homes became living organisms never fully awake, never fully asleep, but pulsing gently with layered awareness. This structure shaped the psychology of night. People accepted darkness not as a void to escape, but as a landscape to navigate with intention. Waking in the middle of the night was not a problem, it was part of being human. And as this ancient rhythm unfolds, another question rises. What happened inside the body during these long, drifting hours when sleep and darkness shape the mind in ways modern life rarely allows? Before artificial light stretched the evening into restless wakefulness, the human body responded to darkness with a precision that feels almost foreign today. When the sun slipped beyond the horizon, the brain released a slow, deliberate cascade of melatonin, lowering the internal tempo of thought and pulling ancient people toward drowsiness as naturally as breathing. The night signaled a shift from action to conservation. Muscles relaxed, posture softened, and the body surrendered to rhythms shaped by thousands of generations that lived entirely by the sun's rising and fading light. This biological descent into stillness was profound. Digestion slowed, heartbeats deepened, and breath fell into a gentle cadence that steadied both mind and spirit. In the absence of glowing screens, lamps, or engines, internal sensations felt louder. The quiet pulse behind the ribs, the lingering ache from a day of labor, even the cool sting of night air touching the skin, all became noticeable in a way modern distractions rarely allow. Darkness amplified the inner world, and in that amplification the body found its balance. Rest was not simply the absence of movement, but a deliberate physiological state shaped by necessity. Nights were colder, food scarcer, and warmth precious. The body conserved energy instinctively, lowering temperature and slowing metabolism so that every stored calorie could last until dawn. Then came the waking interval, the natural pause between the first and second sleep. During this period, prolactin levels rose, creating a state of calm alertness that felt neither fully awake nor entirely drowsy. Ancient people used this biological window with quiet purpose. They whispered prayers, tended embers, or simply sat in stillness, letting thoughts drift like smoke from the fire. It was a meditative awareness, born not from discipline but from biology. The mind, unburdened by urgency, wandered deeply, making connections and insights that daytime tasks had pushed aside. This rhythm was once universal. The body moved through darkness in partnership with the environment, guided by light, temperature, and instinct. Sleep was a cycle, not a block. Wakefulness was gentle, not forced. Modern life, with its constant illumination, has blurred these patterns, masking the hormonal cues that once shaped every night. Ancient bodies drifted into darkness with ease because the world around them invited it. Their biology aligned with the heavens, matching the slow turning of the earth. Understanding these rhythms reveals how much has changed. It shows that night once shaped not only thought and emotion, but the very chemistry of being human. And as the body surrendered to darkness, the mind entered its own landscape, one woven from memory, sensation, and mystery. This inner world unfolded in dreams that carried meaning far beyond sleep. These dreamlike states reflected the deep bond between ancient physiology and the natural world, shaping stories that guided communities for generations. In the stillness of night, the mind explored truths daylight often concealed, revealing a quieter, more instinctive intelligence. Through this union of body and darkness, people discovered insights that shaped their understanding of life itself. In the darkness of ancient nights, when the body softened into sleep and the mind slipped past waking thought, dreams emerged as bridges between the seen and unseen. People did not consider them fleeting illusions or random sparks of memory. They believed dreams carried intention. They were messages delivered through symbols, whispers, and shifting landscapes woven from forces that daylight could not reveal. As sleepers murmured softly on mats and furs, the night seemed to hover around them, waiting to offer insight. Across Mesopotamia, dream interpreters held roles of profound importance. Kings consulted them before battles, merchants before journeys, and families before major decisions. A dream of a rising river could signal abundance. A broken wheel might warn of danger. These interpretations shaped actions as firmly as laws. In Egypt, dreams were seen as a realm where gods traveled freely. People slept in temples hoping for divine encounters, believing that messages carried through sleep could heal the body or guide the heart. Priests learned to read these visions, treating them as sacred conversations with deities. In Greece, seekers journeyed to the temples of Asclepius, where they engaged in incubation, sleeping in sacred spaces to invite healing dreams. They believed divine guidance worked through images that surfaced only when the mind loosened its grip on the waking world. Far from these stone temples, in nomadic camps stretched across plains and deserts, elders listened carefully to dream accounts told at dawn. These visions were viewed as pathways to ancestral wisdom. A dream of an animal might signal a migration route. A dream of fire might warn of conflict. Elders preserved these symbolic languages, passing them from one generation to the next. The quiet interval between first and second sleep made these dreams even more vivid. Without artificial light seeping into the mind, without distant engines humming or screens flickering, people drifted into deeper states of sleep. Their bodies followed ancient rhythms that allowed long stretches of uninterrupted dreaming. When they woke during the nightly pause, many reflected on the visions they had just experienced, discussing them with those who shared the same fire. Then, as they slipped back into their second sleep, these reflections shaped the dreams that followed, creating layered stories that felt connected to something larger. Dreams influenced choices in ways modern people might underestimate. Wars were postponed because of ominous visions. Marriages were arranged after symbolic dreams hinted at compatibility. Travelers delayed journeys based on warnings received in sleep. Dreams became threads that wove through daily life, binding emotion, belief, and action into a single fabric. To ancient people, the night offered truths that the day obscured. They believed dreams revealed hidden patterns, offered forewarnings, and connected them to forces far beyond the physical world. And while many dreams comforted, others unsettled visions that pulled people abruptly from sleep, leaving them gasping in the dark. It is here that the ancient night turned even more mysterious, as people confronted nightmares, restlessness, and the disturbances that shadowed their sleep. Night did not always cradle ancient people in comfort. Sometimes, the darkness turned inward, shaping fears that rose from the depths of sleep itself. When a nightmare swept through the mind, it did not fade like a modern bad dream. It lingered, heavy and meaningful, carrying the weight of a warning. People woke breathless, sitting upright on mats or furs, staring into the shadows as if expecting the dream to continue outside their own thoughts. To them, a terrifying vision was not random. It was a message, an omen sent by gods, ancestors, or wandering spirits, displeased or desperate to be heard. Families listened closely when someone recounted a nightmare at dawn. A dream of drowning could signal a coming storm. A dream of fire might hint at conflict. A dream of a faceless figure was interpreted with great caution, believed to reflect betrayal or hidden harm. These interpretations shaped decisions, altering travel plans, influencing rituals, or prompting protective offerings. Fear became a kind of guidance, directing people towards safety through symbols only sleep could deliver. But something far more unsettling visited them in the deepest hours. Sleep paralysis, silent, sudden, and universal, struck without pattern. A person would wake, aware yet unable to move, breath caught between panic and stillness. Their eyes opened, but their limbs remained stone. In that vulnerable moment, ancient minds turned to the only explanations they had. Cultures separated by oceans described the same haunting intruder, a presence pressing down on the chest, stealing breath, watching from inches away. Some saw shadow figures leaning over them. Others sensed ancestral spirits demanding attention. Many felt a creature crouched on their ribs, its weight cold and relentless. These experiences carved themselves into folklore. In Mesopotamia, a night demon was said to sit upon sleepers, choking them with invisible hands. In northern Europe, a mare visited the vulnerable, giving rise to the word nightmare. In parts of Africa and Asia, hostile ancestors were blamed, believed to punish those who neglected ritual obligations. Wherever humans slept, the same phenomenon emerged with eerily consistent descriptions: the body frozen, the breath shallow, the mind desperate for escape. Restless nights carried their own burdens. When someone could not sleep, it was rarely dismissed. Insomnia meant imbalance, a spirit disturbed, an illness approaching, or a ritual performed incorrectly. People drank warm herbal brews mixed from leaves gathered at dusk. They whispered charms into the dark, hoping to soothe whatever force stirred inside them. In some places, a healer would pass smoke over the body, cleansing the sleeper of unseen tension clinging to the skin. These nighttime struggles revealed a truth ancient people lived with constantly. The night did not only threaten from the outside, it threatened from within. Their own minds could betray them in the quiet hours, turning shadows into warnings and sleep into a battleground. Now, having walked through these intimate fears, the story turns outward again. The night did not only shape individuals, it shaped entire communities, influencing gatherings, relationships, and the rhythms of social life after dusk. When the last traces of daylight slipped behind the horizon and homes settled into their protective stillness, a different kind of life emerged in some ancient communities. Not loud or lavish, but quiet, warm, and profoundly human. Around central fire pits or small shared hearths, people gathered in gentle clusters, drawn by the glow that softened the edges of the night. These gatherings were never guaranteed. They depended on fuel, weather, and the unspoken calculation of safety. Yet when they did happen, they felt like stepping into a sheltered bubble of light suspended within an endless sea of darkness. Neighbors who spent the day working fields or tending herds finally allowed their shoulders to relax. Families who rarely had time for conversation found a moment to breathe together. Fire crackled softly, its sparks rising and fading like drifting embers of thought. Voices remained low, as if speaking too loudly might alert the night to their presence. The darkness beyond the fire's reach seemed to listen, and so people spoke with care. Stories flowed easily here. Someone recounted a moment from the day the stubborn mule, the unexpected visitor, the rumor carried from a distant village. Others shared older tales passed down through generations, creation stories, cautionary legends, or memories of ancestors whose names were spoken only at night. The fire illuminated faces in shifting amber tones, turning expressions into gentle masks that deepened the intimacy of each shared word. Children leaned close, absorbing every detail, their imaginations stretching into the dark. Adults found comfort in the rhythm of familiar voices, the grounding presence of community. These gatherings acted as a subtle form of protection. Many ears meant many listeners, all tuned to the sounds beyond the ring of light. A distant bark, a broken twig, or the rustle of grass was noted collectively, interpreted without interrupting the flow of conversation. Unity made the night feel smaller, less capable of creeping in unnoticed. Travelers rare but welcome brought stories of foreign lands, strange customs, and unfamiliar dangers. Their arrival transformed fire pits into informal meeting places, where people compared knowledge, asked questions, and marveled at the sheer size of the world beyond their own horizon. For a moment, the night felt wider, not because it was empty, but because it brimmed with unseen lives. But the emotional heart of these gatherings was simpler still: companionship. After long hours of labor and vigilance, the fire gave people permission to slow down. Silence settled easily between them, not awkward but peaceful. A shared glance, a soft laugh, or a nod carried more meaning than it ever could in daylight. The warmth of the flames blended with the warmth of presence, reassuring each person that they were not alone. These moments were short-lived. As the fire dwindled, people drifted back to their homes before cold or danger pushed too close. Yet the comfort they carried with them lasted through the long night, shaping how they faced the darkness. And from these quiet gatherings arose another facet of ancient nightlife: those who stepped forward not just to talk, but to entertain, transforming nighttime into a stage lit only by flame. When darkness wrapped itself around ancient settlements, a quiet kind of magic awakened. The night, which could feel heavy and unforgiving, softened around those who knew how to use it as a stage. Storytellers, musicians, dancers, and shadow artists stepped forward, turning small circles of firelight into worlds far larger than anything daylight allowed. People gathered close, their faces glowing in warm flickers, ready to be carried into memories older than their own lifetimes. The storyteller usually began first. Their voice rose gently, weaving through the crackling of firewood, shaping the air with cadence and rhythm. In the dark, their words seemed fuller, heavier, coloured by the sway of flames behind them. Shadows stretched and contracted on the ground, forming shapes that made every tale feel alive. A story told at night carried weight it never held under the sun, because the audience felt the presence of the unseen pressing closer, listening alongside them. Nearby, a musician tuned a simple instrument strings of gut or hair stretched across wood. The first note drifted into the cool night, vibrating softly through bodies gathered around the fire. Darkness turned sound into something deeper. Echoes carried farther, lingering in the air like breath. Even the smallest melody wrapped itself around listeners, filling the spaces where sight failed. The music blended with wind and insects, becoming part of the landscape itself. Sometimes a dancer stepped forward, moving through torchlight with a grace shaped by the shifting glow. Their body cast elongated shadows that danced along the walls or across the ground, creating silent companions that mimicked and exaggerated every gesture. To watch such a performance was to watch a dialogue between body and flame. Children stared, mesmerized, their imaginations weaving stories into every silhouette. Adults followed the movement with quieter understanding, sensing the deeper meanings folded into each turn of the wrist, each sweeping step. Shadow artists added another layer of wonder. Using carved objects or bare hands, they shaped silhouettes against stretched cloth or flat stone surfaces. Animals, spirits, heroes, and monsters flickered into existence, summoned from nothing more than firelight. These illusions felt real, because the night blurred the line between imagination and presence. Something about the dark made even the simplest shapes appear mysterious, as though they carried messages from another realm. These performances were more than entertainment. They preserved memory. Stories taught lessons born from hardship. Songs carried genealogies or honored those long gone. Dances expressed gratitude, grief, triumph, or longing. Through these traditions, a community learned who it was. Night became a shared classroom, a temple without walls, where identity was reinforced with every verse and gesture. As the final note faded, or the storyteller's voice softened into silence, the night seemed to hold its breath for a moment before settling again. People dispersed slowly, warmed by what they had felt, carrying fragments of stories back to their homes. Yet, not all nighttime activity was born from art or tradition. Some worked in the dark out of necessity, shaping the economy and labour of their communities long after the fires dimmed. While most of the ancient world surrendered to sleep, a small group of people stepped quietly into their work, moving through a landscape that belonged almost exclusively to them. These were the night workers, the bakers, millers, guards, and labourers whose lives unfolded in the narrow space between darkness and dawn. Their footsteps echoed through streets emptied of daily bustle, where even animals slept with heads tucked beneath wings or resting against warm stone. The night felt different to them, not mysterious or hostile, but familiar, almost companion-like. The baker was often the first to rise. Long before the first hint of light touched the horizon, they ground grain in dim, flickering lamplight, the rhythm of stone against stone becoming a heartbeat for the sleeping community. Dough rose slowly in the cool night air, shaped by hands accustomed to silence. By sunrise, their unseen labour transformed into the bread that fed households, travellers, and workers beginning their day. Millers followed similar rhythms. Grinding grain during daylight heat risked exhaustion, so they worked when the night softened the air. The sound of turning wheels or pounding stones drifted through the darkness like a steady chant. Their work required strength and endurance, yet the cool hours offered some mercy. They lived in a world marked not by clocks, but by temperature, necessity, and the slow, dependable movement of their tools. Guards walked their routes with torches or lanterns held low, sweeping shadows with practiced eyes. They checked gates, listened to distant noises, and traced the perimeter of walls that protected those sleeping within. Their vigil was a quiet burden. They knew the city in ways daylight workers never could, where the air flowed differently between alleyways, where dogs barked for no reason, where silence felt wrong. Through long hours, they forged a strange camaraderie with the dark, treating it as both adversary and ally. In warmer climates, fields came alive at night. Workers gathered to harvest crops, pull water, or tend animals while the oppressive heat of day rested. Lamps swung gently from ropes or posts, creating pockets of golden light in a vast sea of shadow. Tasks that were punishing under the sun became manageable beneath the stars. These labourers spoke softly to one another, sharing stories to stay alert, forming bonds built on shared fatigue and effort. Night workers developed a sensitivity to subtle changes others never noticed. They could tell the time by the feel of the air, the shift in birdsong, or the star's position. They witnessed rare moments, meteor streaks, nocturnal animals crossing empty paths, the pale glow of dawn forming like a promise behind distant hills. Though seldom honoured, these workers kept their societies running. Markets opened because bakers rose early. Families ate because millers toiled unseen. Cities remained safe because guards walked their silent routes. Farming thrived because labourers braved the dark. And just beyond their lamplight, in certain regions, the night held something entirely different places, where darkness transformed not into stillness, but into movement, sound, and unexpected forms of ancient nightlife. When most homes dimmed their lamps and families settled into sleep, certain corners of the ancient world awakened with a different kind of energy. Night did not silence every community. In some regions, it invited commerce, conversation, and quiet opportunity. Early night markets glowed like small constellations scattered across the dark landscape, each one shaped by necessity as much as by culture. Oil lamps flickered along narrow lanes, illuminating stalls piled with grain, fruit, fish, cloth, and tools. Their halos of light were small, but they created enough visibility for trade to continue long after the heat of the day had vanished. In the Middle East and Mediterranean, cooler temperatures made nighttime the most comfortable time to buy and sell. Families walked together through these dim corridors of commerce, examining goods by lamp glow, their shadows stretching long behind them. Vendors called softly, aware that sound carried differently at night. Bargaining became a murmur rather than a shout, a negotiation conducted almost intimately. The scent of spices hung in the air, mixing with smoke from cooking fires and the earthy smell of packed dirt streets. The marketplace felt suspended between waking and dreaming, as if the night itself was watching. But elsewhere, night markets lived in secrecy. Traders who preferred to avoid taxes or watchful officials operated under shadow. They moved quickly, relying on darkness to conceal exchanges of smuggled goods, rare herbs, unregistered livestock, forbidden texts, or items stolen or found along trade routes. These hidden transactions created a parallel economy, known only to those willing to navigate its risks. A single lamp could betray them, so deals were made with minimal light, often guided only by touch and trust. Fishermen, meanwhile, returned from their night journeys with fresh catches that could not wait for morning heat. Their boats slipped into coastal villages quietly, the smell of salt and seaweed announcing their arrival before their voices did. Farmers brought produce harvested in the cool hours, fruits, greens, herbs that would wilt under the sun. These nighttime arrivals created brief bursts of activity that faded as quickly as they formed. Travelers used darkness for protection. Some crossed deserts or open plains at night to avoid bandits or scorching heat. When they reached settlements, they joined whatever trade was unfolding, exchanging news, goods, or small treasures collected from far-off places. Their unexpected presence added layers of mystery to the night market. New dialects, unfamiliar clothing, strange objects that glinted in lamplight. The atmosphere of these markets was unlike anything found during the day. Light was scarce, and so every gesture felt more deliberate. Shadows softened faces, making anonymity easier. The darkness made people bolder in some ways, more cautious in others. A single transaction could carry opportunity or danger. These markets formed a subtle social network, invisible to those who slept through the experience. Night was not merely a pause in ancient society. It was a parallel realm where goods moved, secrets changed hands, and communities extended their lives into hours most people feared. And from these glowing stalls and hidden exchanges rose a deeper truth. Darkness shaped not only economy, but imagination. Now, with society's nighttime layers revealed, the story turns toward the spiritual realm, how night shaped myth, ritual, and humanity's sense of the sacred. Long before science spoke of particles and galaxies, ancient people looked into the night and saw something older, deeper, and far more mysterious than simple absence. To them, darkness was a realm in its own right, a living substance that existed before creation, shaping gods, worlds, and destinies. When the sun slipped beneath the horizon and the sky opened into a quiet expanse of blackened stars, they believed they were witnessing a return to the universe's original state. The night was not empty. It was the oldest presence they knew. Across the deserts of Egypt, priests imagined the sun god Ra entering a dangerous underworld the moment daylight faded. Each night, he battled serpents and shadow beings who sought to swallow the light forever. The journey was treacherous, yet sacred, for without it, the sun could never rise again. People listened to these stories and saw night as the passageway through which creation renewed itself. Darkness became a cosmic corridor, a place even gods had to navigate with caution. Far to the north, the Greeks spoke of Nyx, the primordial goddess of night. She was older than Zeus, older than the earth itself, a being whose power was so profound that even the king of the gods dared not challenge her. Her children, sleep, death, dreams, revealed her influence over every realm between life and its boundaries. To the Greeks, night was a mother of mysteries, an ancient presence whose depths no mortal could fully understand. In indigenous cultures spread across Africa, the Pacific, and the Americas, darkness was equally alive. Night marked the moment when ancestors approached the world of the living. Their footsteps were felt in the cooling air, their voices carried in the rustle of leaves and distant calls of nocturnal creatures. The veil between realms thinned when light faded. Families honored these hours with songs, offerings, or silent remembrance, believing that darkness allowed wisdom to flow more freely between worlds. Even the stars themselves were interpreted through this sacred lens. They were holes in the dark fabric of creation, glimpses into realms beyond human reach. Some cultures believed the sky at night revealed the true, eternal world, the one that existed before daylight masked its brilliance. Darkness was not something to overcome. It was something to respect, to listen to, and to interpret with care. Because night represented beginnings, it symbolized potential. Creation myths around the world start with darkness, a vast ocean, a silent void, a mother goddess hidden in shadow. Light was a later development, a spark born from the depth of something immeasurable. Ancient people sensed that darkness held secrets the day could never reveal. By seeing night as divine, they felt connected to something immense, a cosmic cycle of renewal, struggle, and unseen activity. And once darkness became a sacred space, it naturally filled with figures, spirits, and beings who belonged to that realm alone. Now the story shifts from the cosmic to the intimate. Exploring the shadowed inhabitants, ancient people believed awakened when the sun disappeared. When the ancient world sank into darkness, people believed they were no longer alone. The night, with its shifting air and quiet, expansive spaces, became home to a vast, unseen population, spirits who moved with purpose, curiosity, or mischief. These beings were woven so tightly into nightly life that families shaped their routines around them, acknowledging their presence with respect rather than disbelief. Some spirits were guardians. In Rome and Greece, households honored protective beings who stood watch through the night, silently guarding doorways, hearths, and sleeping children. Small statues were placed near thresholds, their expressions calm and steady, as if listening for footsteps beyond the walls. These guardians were not dramatic figures. They did their work quietly, absorbing fear, repelling ill fortune, and lending a sense of invisible company to families who feared the unpredictability of darkness. Their presence offered reassurance that not every unseen force was hostile. But the night was not ruled by protectors alone. Trickster spirits wandered through many cultures, testing wit, humility, or caution. In West Africa, the clever Anansi appeared in stories told beside fading fires. Though often humorous, he reminded listeners that cleverness could unravel danger, and that pride could invite trouble. In the Middle East, desert spirits played their own games, luring travelers off familiar paths or whispering misleading hints into the dark. These beings were unpredictable, neither good nor evil, reflecting the ambiguity of night itself. And then there were the shadow wanderers beings, whose presence made people close doors tightly and whisper prayers before sleep. Some cultures believed these spirits slipped through cracks between stones or moved across rooftops where moonlight failed to reach. Their forms were never clearly described. Instead, they existed in the spaces where fear met imagination. A brush of cold air, a shifting shadow, or a sudden stillness might signal their passing. Families burned fragrant herbs to keep them at bay, or placed symbolic items near beds to create boundaries that spirits were expected to respect. Restless ancestors were another presence believed to rise with nightfall. In countless cultures, the dead were thought to draw closer during the quietest hours, seeking acknowledgement, guidance, or unresolved answers. People listened closely in the dark, interpreting certain sounds as footsteps or whispers, belonging not to strangers, but to loved ones long gone. These encounters were not always frightening. Sometimes they offered comfort, a reminder of familial ties stronger than death. Together, these beings created an invisible society that mirrored the human one, protective, unpredictable, comforting, unsettling. They shaped rituals, architecture, and behavior. A doorway carved with symbols was more than decoration. It was a guard post. A bowl of water left outside was an offering. A whispered name before sleep was a request for protection. In these beliefs, the night felt populated, alive with presences that watched, wandered, or warned. Darkness held depth, not emptiness. And because so many spirits were believed to move through the night, societies developed rituals, careful ceremonies designed to honor, appease, or shield against these unseen forces. When darkness filled the ancient world, it carried more than silence, and shadow it carried opportunity. Night was the hour when the veil between realms thinned, when human voices seemed to travel farther, and when spirits were believed to listen with sharpened attention. In courtyards lit by small clusters of torches, in forest clearings where moonlight dripped through leaves, and in stone sanctuaries buried beneath layers of history, people gathered to perform rituals that felt too sacred or too dangerous for the light of day. In Mesopotamia, priests conducted exorcisms beneath the stars. They believed the night made hidden forces easier to confront, as if darkness revealed what sunlight concealed. Incantations drifted through the air, mingling with smoke rising from bowls of smouldering herbs. Families watched the ritual with a mixture of fear and hope, trusting that the stillness of night allowed their pleas to reach the unseen beings who shaped their fate. Far to the west, the Greeks sought healing dreams in temples dedicated to Asclepius. After sunset, supplicants entered dark chambers, lying upon sacred bedding where they hoped the god would visit them in sleep. Darkness became a conduit for revelation. Dreams were treated as messages, not illusions, and the surrounding silence amplified every sensation. The boundary between waking and dreaming felt porous, like the edge of a pool reflecting moonlight. In the misty regions of ancient Europe, Celtic communities held moonlit ceremonies dedicated to nature spirits. Circles of participants gathered around fires, their silhouettes merging with the surrounding forest. Soft chants echoed through the trees, rising and falling in harmony with the wind. Offerings were placed at the roots of ancient oaks or upon stones warmed by fire. Here, night symbolized renewal, the moment when life retreated inward, preparing to awaken again. Across the African continent, nighttime dances honored ancestors believed to walk close to the living after dusk. Drums beat slowly, then faster, sending vibrations through the ground. Dancers moved in flowing patterns, illuminated by flickering flames. Their shadows leapt and intertwined, creating shapes that felt alive with ancestral presence. Children watched from the edges, sensing that the dancers were not alone. Something unseen seemed to move with them. The emotional tone of these rituals varied. Some were solemn, steeped in reverence. Others pulsed with joy or urgency. But all shared the same belief. Night offered access to forces unreachable during daylight. Whether seeking healing, protection, guidance, or forgiveness, people turned to darkness because it felt ancient and responsive, a realm where gods and spirits crossed paths with mortals. In these ceremonies, night became more than a time of day. It became a landscape, a bridge, a medium. People entered darkness not to hide, but to reach farther than daylight allowed. They believed the universe listened differently after sunset, more closely, more personally, more honestly. And from this sacred interaction with the unseen world emerged another layer of meaning. The night not only connected humans with spirits, but also shaped their ideas of morality, danger, and the forces that governed order itself. As darkness spread across ancient landscapes, it did more than cover the world in shadow, it reshaped behavior. Night demanded caution, not only because physical dangers grew sharper, but because people believed moral boundaries softened in the absence of light. To protect themselves, families, and communities, cultures crafted intricate webs of taboos and unspoken rules that guided every action taken after dusk. These rules were more than superstition. They were survival encoded into ritual. Whistling at night, for instance, was forbidden in many regions. Some believed the sound mimicked the voices of wandering spirits, calling them closer. Others feared it attracted malevolent forces that listened eagerly for any open invitation. A simple tune, harmless in daylight, became a risky act under the moon. Children were warned that careless noise might awaken something invisible, something best left sleeping. Windows carried their own warnings. In some cultures, children were forbidden from looking outside after sunset, not only to prevent them from spotting dangerous animals or unwelcome strangers, but to shield them from glimpsing spirits believed to wander the roads. A glance into the night was seen as a glance into another realm, one that could glance back. Curtains were drawn early, and homes sealed themselves into small fortresses of warmth and light. Wandering alone was discouraged for similar reasons. Without company, a person walking at night risked far more than physical harm. Many believed that spirits targeted the solitary, drawn to those whose footsteps echoed too loudly in the stillness. Even adults avoided unnecessary movement, choosing instead to stay close to hearths or communal fires. The night was patient, they said, and it favored those who walked without witness. Curses carried heavier weight after sunset. Words spoken in anger were thought to linger in the cold night air, traveling farther than they would during the day. People measured their speech carefully, aware that the darkness amplified intention. Objects left outside brooms, tools, clothing, were believed to absorb the night's influence. A misplaced item could attract unwanted spirits, or lose whatever protective charm it held. Even sweeping after sunset was discouraged in some regions, for fear it might sweep away good fortune or disturb the spirits residing near the home. These rules acted as guardrails, shaping conduct when vulnerability was highest. They taught children to remain aware without filling their minds with constant fear. They encouraged adults to respect boundaries that kept the community safe. In a world illuminated by a few fragile flames, caution became a shared responsibility. Taboos ensured that no one acted carelessly when the margin for error was slim. Yet beneath these restrictions lay something deeper, an understanding that darkness tested character as much as courage. The night revealed who obeyed communal wisdom and who tempted fate. It exposed impatience, pride, or disregard that daylight often concealed. In this way, The night became a moral teacher, shaping generations through whispered warnings and inherited rules. Now, as these spiritual and behavioral codes settle into place, the focus shifts toward another realm, shaped profoundly by the dark, how ancient people faced illness, injury, and sudden emergencies when help was hardest to reach. Nighttime illness was one of the quietest and most terrifying events an ancient family could face. Danger outside the home often announced itself with sound or movement, but sickness arrived silently, slipping into the stillness when people were least prepared. A child stirred restlessly in the dark. An elder gasped awake, clutching their chest. A laborer who had seemed merely tired at dusk collapsed into sudden fever. In these hours, before the world stirred and before any help could be reached, the night felt heavier than ever. Inside the dim home, the only light came from a fading ember or a single trembling flame. Families moved by touch, not sight, placing a palm against a forehead, counting breaths by ear, or lifting a hand to feel the shiver of a limb. Darkness swallowed detail, turning symptoms into mysteries. Was the heat of a fever rising or breaking? Was the dampness on the skin sweat or something more dangerous? The fire could not burn brighter without precious fuel, and even if it did, smoke might choke the room. Every action came with risk. Fear settled over the household like a second layer of night. Someone whispered the sick person's name, hoping for a response. Someone else slipped outside to fetch water, stepping carefully through the shadows where predators and spirits were believed to move. A neighbor might be awakened with urgent knocks, their sleepy confusion replaced quickly by shared concern. Communities relied heavily on one another during these moments, because no single household possessed all the knowledge it needed. Without trained healers available during these hours, ancient families turned to instinct, tradition, and memory. A warm cloth was pressed to a sweating brow. Herbs gathered earlier in the season were crushed between fingers, their scent rising faintly in the air. Small prayers were spoken sometimes to gods, sometimes to ancestors, sometimes simply into the dark, as if darkness itself could intervene. People believed night intensified everything: illness, emotion, danger, hope. A whispered plea felt stronger then, traveling farther in the stillness. The sick person drifted between wakefulness and uneasy sleep. In the dark, every breath sounded louder. A child's whimper echoed in the quiet. An elder's coughing seemed impossibly sharp. The family waited, counting moments in a way that made time stretch unnaturally long. Dawn felt distant, almost unreachable. If the illness worsened, there was nothing to do but comfort and endure. If it stabilized, relief washed over everyone in a soft, trembling wave. Outside, the world held its silence. Stars shifted slowly overhead, indifferent to the struggle happening beneath them. The night gave no answers, only space to fear, hope, and wait. When the first pale light finally seeped through the cracks of the home, clarity returned. Faces could be examined, wounds seen, fevers gauged. The healer down the path could be summoned, but those hours before dawn, when the darkness seemed almost alive, carved themselves deeply into memory. And just as sickness brought dread to ancient nights, so too did injury sudden, sharp, and often far more dangerous when the world lay hidden in shadow. In the quiet hours after sunset, danger did not always roar or whisper. It sometimes arrived with a slip, a misstep, or a moment of distraction. Ancient nights were filled with tasks that could not be postponed: tending the fire, checking animals, stepping outside to fetch water, or moving through narrow rooms where shadows pooled like ink. In such darkness, even the simplest action carried weight. Feet found uneven ground, hands brushed against sharp edges. A stumble became a fall, and a fall could become a crisis. When someone cried out, the calm of the night fractured instantly. Families rushed toward the sound, guided only by flickering firelight or memory of the home's layout. Injuries were difficult to assess. Blood disappeared into the darkness, turning everything into shades of uncertain shadow. A gash might seem shallow until a trembling hand met the depth of it. A twisted ankle might hide beneath swelling no one could yet see. The night concealed severity, turning every injury into a question that would not be fully answered until dawn. Panic rose quickly, not because people were careless, but because darkness amplified fear. What might have been simple in daylight felt dangerous at night. A cut carried the threat of infection, long before people understood the cause. A fall risked broken bones that could not be mended. A wound left untreated until morning might already have begun to fester. These possibilities hovered silently around the injured person, pressing against the small circle of light in which the family gathered. Yet ancient people were resourceful. They acted not with tools, but with instinct passed down across generations. A cloth was pressed against a wound, its fibers darkening slowly. Warm water was heated if fuel allowed it, the steam rising faintly in the chill air. Smoke from certain herbs was believed to cleanse or soothe, drifting over the skin in thin, wavering spirals. Someone whispered calming words, steadying the injured person's breath. Someone else stepped outside to summon a neighbor known for treating wounds, even though leaving the house meant facing the uncertain world beyond the door. Sometimes, however, practical efforts were not enough. When swelling refused to slow, when bleeding continued, or when a person drifted in and out of consciousness, families turned to prayer or ritual. Words carried softly through the darkness, addressed to ancestors, spirits, or gods associated with healing. Night seemed to listen differently, and people believed those listening forces might intervene where human hands could not. As minutes stretched into long, uneven breaths, the family waited for signs stillness where there had been trembling, quiet where there had been panic, or, in the worst cases, silence that settled too deeply. Only at sunrise would the true extent of the injury reveal itself, and among all nighttime emergencies, few invoked more fear than an event both natural and perilous. Childbirth beginning when the world outside was wrapped in darkness. Childbirth in the ancient world was always precarious, but when labor began in the deep hours of night, the experience carried a weight that settled over an entire household. Darkness made every sound sharper, every breath heavier. In the dim rooms where families slept close together, a sudden cry or whispered plea signaled the beginning of a long, uncertain vigil. A mother gripped a wooden beam or leaned into the arms of a relative, feeling the first waves of pain tighten through her body while the world outside lay silent and unseen. Midwives were summoned quickly, their footsteps hurried but steady. These women entered carrying nothing but experience, knowledge passed from elder to apprentice, from mother to daughter, shaped by countless births witnessed under similar conditions. Their eyes strained to read subtle movements in the flickering light. They touched the mother's abdomen with practiced calm, listened to her breathing, and guided her through each stage without the tools or certainty modern medicine provides. Every motion relied on memory. Every decision was made in shadows. The darkness changed everything. Midwives could not clearly see color, movement, or bleeding. They relied on warmth, tension, and instinct. A mother's voice told them more than their eyes could. Her grip revealed strength or exhaustion. Her breath signaled progress or danger. In these hours, the human body spoke in a language of tiny shifts, and the midwives listened with reverence. Rituals surrounded the moment. Families believed birth opened a doorway between two realms, one where spirits wandered freely. To protect the mother and child, herbs were burned, their fragrant smoke trailing upward like a plea. Incantations were whispered, not loudly, just enough for the listening spirits to hear. Charms were placed near thresholds, and water bowls were set out to confuse or distract harmful beings. Some cultures believed ancestors hovered nearby, guiding the child's passage into life. Others feared lurking forces drawn to vulnerability. Pain filled the space, echoing softly against the walls. A mother's cry held fear and determination intertwined. Outside, the world remained unaware, yet inside the home, everything centered on the narrow margin between survival and loss. Midwives murmured encouragement, wiping sweat from the mother's brow, adjusting her posture, helping her hold steady when exhaustion threatened to overtake her. When the moment of birth arrived, time felt suspended. The child's first sound, if it came, broke the tension like a rush of wind through a closed room. But if silence followed, the midwives worked with urgent precision, coaxing breath, tapping tiny feet, clearing a newborn's airway in the dim light. The stakes were profound, and every heartbeat mattered. If both mother and child survived, relief washed over everyone like a second dawn. If complications lingered, the night stretched longer, heavier. Birth in darkness remained sacred, terrifying, and unforgettable. And when emergencies exceeded the skill of midwives, families had no choice. They stepped out into the night to seek help, calling on neighbors and distant healers, who answered in the uncertain hours before morning. A single cry in the night carried a weight unlike any sound made during the day. In the ancient world, where silence wrapped itself around homes and pathways like a second skin, a shout of distress cut through the darkness with startling clarity. It might come from just beyond a doorway or from the edge of a field, but wherever it originated, it jolted entire communities awake. People listened first, eyes still closed, bodies frozen, trying to understand the tone. Was it fear, pain, warning? The ambiguity made the moment electric. When the second cry came, the village stirred. Doors creaked open, flames were coaxed to life with hurried breaths. Torches flared, casting uneven light across walls and sleeping animals. Neighbors stepped out, pulling cloaks over their shoulders, moving toward the sound not with certainty, but with instinct. Nighttime emergencies did not allow hesitation. The darkness itself magnified every risk. Messengers were often the first to act. Barefoot and fast, they ran along familiar paths, carrying urgency from one home to another. Their voices broke the stillness as they called for healers, midwives, or elders who understood how to guide the frightened. Youths followed behind, gathering buckets of water or carrying extra embers in clay bowls to ignite new torches. Fear sharpened their senses, pushing them faster than daylight ever did. Elders stepped outside slowly but purposefully, leaning on staffs polished by years of use. Their presence steadied the crowd. They asked questions in low tones, sorting through confusion to understand the crisis. Was someone injured? Was there a fire? Had a predator wandered too close to the settlement? Or was the cry born from unexpected labor, demanding swift action rather than defense? Each possibility required a different response, and the elders directed the flow of people with calm gestures. If danger lay beyond the village boundary, groups formed quickly. Men and women walked together, torches raised high, searching for the source of distress. Their shadows stretched long across the ground, creating shifting shapes that blended with the night. Sometimes the cry belonged to a traveler who had lost his way, or a shepherd who had fallen while checking his animals. Sometimes it was a false alarm, a startled shout after a stumble. But people responded all the same, because ignoring a cry meant risking someone's life. Within the village, households acted as one. Neighbors gathered around the affected home, offering blankets, food, or simple presents. Children were ushered indoors, though many peeked from behind curtains, watching adults move with unity rarely seen in calmer hours. Every person understood that nighttime crises were not private matters. They belonged to everyone. Whether the emergency ended in relief or mourning, the response revealed a truth woven deeply into ancient life. Survival in the dark depended on collective strength. People trusted one another because the night demanded it. For most of human history, night was an empire that ruled without opposition. Darkness stretched across cities, fields, and forests like a living tide, swallowing detail, reshaping sound, and dictating when daily life could begin and when it had to stop. But slowly, almost timidly at first, humans began to challenge that ancient dominion. The first sparks were small, fragile, and unreliable, yet they marked the beginning of a quiet revolution. It started with torches, simple bundles of resin-soaked reeds or twisted branches bound tightly together. When lit, they crackled with uneven fire, throwing golden bursts across the ground. The light was fleeting, licking at the dark rather than defeating it. But for early people, a torch offered mobility. It allowed a traveler to take a pocket of brightness into the unknown, lifting shadows for only a few paces before they folded back again. Oil lamps followed, shaped from clay, bronze, or stone, each holding a small pool of precious fuel. Their flames were steadier than torches, though dimmer, glowing softly like captured stars. Families suspended them from beams, or placed them on raised shelves where smoke drifted toward crude vents. The light they cast was intimate, illuminating only the closest surfaces while the rest of the home remained wrapped in dusk. Yet even this slight expansion of vision changed how people moved, spoke, and interacted after sunset. Across distant regions, craftsmen began to experiment. They widened wicks to coax brighter flames. They polished metal surfaces to reflect and intensify the glow. Some even placed lamps inside small enclosures that shielded them from wind, producing steadier light that could survive a passing breeze. Every improvement felt like chipping away at the night's authority, though none came close to banishing it. Then came the earliest attempts at public lighting, hesitant steps toward collective illumination. In Greek agoras, lamps were hung near gathering points, so merchants and travelers could move with more confidence. Roman streets, especially in wealthier neighborhoods, featured mounted lamps that flickered through narrow alleys. Persian courtyards experimented with elevated posts, holding clusters of flames designed to cast light downward in widening rings. But these communal flames were far from reliable. They sputtered in wind, drowned in heavy rain, or were extinguished by a single careless movement. They demanded frequent refueling, and those responsible for tending them often battled exhaustion or unpredictable weather. Shadows still ruled most corners, and the light reached only a fraction of the places people hoped it would. Still, a subtle psychological shift began to unfold. For the first time, humans could imagine the night not as an absolute force, but as something negotiable. Instead of retreating fully into their homes, they lingered in dimly lit spaces, speaking softly, conducting small tasks, or simply watching the flames burn against the dark. These early sparks did not conquer the night, but they revealed a new possibility that darkness, though ancient and immense, could be reshaped. And with that first defiant glow came consequences, ones that would slowly transform sleep, behavior, and the human mind itself. The first moments of artificial light did far more than brighten darkness. They began reshaping the human mind in ways no one living at the time could understand. When lamps flickered to life along early streets and in scattered public spaces, people gathered beneath them with curiosity, stepping into pools of glow that felt almost unnatural. These flames encouraged lingering, conversation, and late labor. Night, once a boundary, became a stretched and altered landscape. The change was subtle at first, but it rippled outward, touching sleep, belief, behavior, and emotion. Before artificial lighting, human sleep was segmented. People drifted into a first slumber soon after dusk, woke naturally around midnight, then entered a second sleep closer to dawn. During that quiet waking interval, minds wandered in unusual ways, reflecting, dreaming lightly, whispering to family members, or sitting alone in contemplation. When lamps extended the evening, this interval slowly faded. People went to bed later, slept in a single block, and lost the gentle stillness that once existed between two worlds. Without even noticing, humanity surrendered a natural rhythm older than recorded history. Fear changed too. Darkness, no longer absolute, no longer enveloping every corner, began to retreat. But the retreat was deceptive. The world did not grow safer. Predators still moved beyond the faint glow of lamps. Thieves still navigated shadows. The difference was internal. People no longer felt the full weight of night pressing against their senses. Instead, artificial light offered a false sense of control, convincing communities that the darkness had been tamed when, in truth, only a thin layer had been peeled back. Social habits reshaped themselves around these new lights. Evening gatherings drifted from hearths into shared spaces. Workdays lengthened. Tasks once reserved for daylight crept into the night. Families began spending fewer hours in intimate, firelit clusters. The rituals once performed at dusk chants, charms, whispered prayers, lost some of their urgency. When darkness was no longer overwhelming, many old protections felt unnecessary. Spiritual beings who once seemed close and attentive now felt farther away, displaced by the growing belief that humans had mastered their environment. Even dreams shifted. Without segmented sleep, people entered REM cycles differently, and the vivid, symbolic dreams that once guided behavior became less common. Some cultures noted this change with concern. Others barely noticed, as generational memory faded. But humanity's relationship with the unseen world subtly loosened. With fewer long hours spent in quiet, darkness-induced introspection, the mind grew noisier, busier, more tethered to waking concerns. Artificial light, in its earliest forms, carried no warnings. It simply illuminated. Yet the consequences ran deeper. It unspooled ancient rhythms, softened once sharp fears, rewrote cultural patterns, and dimmed the nightly mysteries that shaped belief for millennia. And even today, long after the first torches and lamps have disappeared, echoes of ancient instincts still linger beneath the surface, waiting in dreams, superstitions, and unexplained emotions that small pockets of darkness continue to awaken. Even in a world of glowing screens and bright street lamps, something old still stirs whenever darkness gathers around us. A quiet creak in a distant hallway, the soft thud of something settling outside, or the faint sense of movement at the edge of vision can trigger a sudden, instinctive unease. These moments feel irrational, yet they resonate deeply, as if awakening a memory we never lived, but somehow inherited. Inside every modern mind, traces of the ancient night still linger. For countless generations, fear of the dark was not superstition, it was strategy. Darkness concealed predators with patient eyes. It sheltered thieves who moved without sound. It held spirits and unseen beings that communities believed wandered freely after sundown. Survival depended on noticing what others ignored. A shift in wind, a missing footstep, a breath too close. The human brain adapted, sharpening its senses, teaching itself to respond quickly to hints of danger. Those instincts did not vanish when the threats faded. They settled into our minds like fossils beneath new layers of thought. Today, when someone hesitates before stepping into an unlit room, that hesitation is a whisper from the past. When a child insists on a nightlight, the request echoes ancient households where even adults feared sleeping in total darkness. The feeling that someone is watching, despite knowing logically that no one is there, is a remnant of a world where being watched might have meant the difference between life and death. Our bodies still tighten, our breath shortens, and our awareness sharpens in ways shaped by ancestors who survived by listening to the dark. Even the stories that frighten us follow old patterns. Tales of figures lurking in shadows, footsteps pacing just out of sight, or voices calling faintly in deserted spaces mirror the dangers ancient people once faced. Horror films and bedtime legends stir fear not by inventing something new, but by reawakening what is already inside us. Instincts built for a time when the night was not an inconvenience, but a threat. The unknown remains unsettling because, for most of human history, the unknown was deadly. Modern life has softened the edges of darkness, but the mind does not forget so easily. Many people still check that their doors are locked before bed, sometimes twice. They wake suddenly from sleep at unfamiliar sounds. They avoid forests or empty streets at night, not because they expect danger, but because something deep within urges caution. These reactions are echoes, not errors, ancient signals passed down through generations. The night still speaks to us in subtle ways. It slows thought, heightens imagination, and opens doors to emotions that daylight keeps tempered. In darkness, we feel our history more clearly, as if the experiences of those who lived before us rise briefly to the surface. And it is here at this meeting point between past and present that we prepare for the final reflection. How the ancient night, with all its danger and wonder, shaped who we became and still shapes who we are. Though electric lights now shimmer across cities, washing buildings and streets in steady brilliance, the deeper story of night has never truly vanished. It lingers beneath the glow, quiet and patient, like a memory carried not in words but in the body. Modern darkness is softened, trimmed at the edges, made convenient and predictable. Yet, if one stands alone on a quiet street or steps outside during a power outage, something ancient stirs a faint recognition of the world as it once was. For most of human existence, night shaped thought, fear, community, and imagination. It dictated when people gathered close and when they listened for danger. It sculpted myths that traveled across generations and carved instincts that still influence behavior today. Even now, long after torches have been replaced by lamps and screens, echoes of that older relationship remain. Bedtime rituals, closing curtains, dimming lights, checking locks, are softened versions of ancient precautions. Stories told around campfires, even as entertainment, tap into a shared ancestry that once relied on flame and companionship to survive the long hours. Festivals honoring the night lantern parades, solstice celebrations, moonlit ceremonies are modern expressions of reverence that once defined entire cultures. Humanity gathers under the stars not only for beauty but for a sense of continuity, a reminder that long before cities rose, the sky was the only ceiling people knew. The awe people feel when looking at constellations is unchanged from the awe their ancestors felt. Only the world beneath those stars has shifted. Yet something has been lost. In brightened nights, the universe feels smaller. The deep silence that once invited introspection is rarely allowed to settle. Artificial light extends productivity, encourages constant motion, and reduces the natural pauses that once shaped human rhythm. The closeness families felt as they huddled around a single flame has softened into the distance created by separate rooms and busy schedules. Modern darkness is no longer a gathering place. It is an interval between distractions. Still, the old night has not disappeared entirely. It shows itself in small ways, in the unease that rises when power fails, in the pull toward quiet roads illuminated only by moonlight, in the strange comfort of hearing distant sounds during sleepless hours. These moments whisper of the time when humanity's senses were sharper, when every person knew the difference between a harmless noise and a dangerous one, when darkness was a teacher as much as a threat. Perhaps the greatest echo lies not in fear but in wonder, the sense that night holds questions too large for daylight to answer. Even surrounded by modern invention, people feel something shift when they stand beneath an unclouded sky. In that vastness, the ancient connection returns, reminding them that their species learned to think, dream, and survive under the rule of darkness. The night that shaped our ancestors still lives within us. It hums beneath the electric glow, murmuring reminders of who we were and quietly shaping who we remain.